So welcome everybody. Can everybody hear me? I see some heads shaking.
Yeah.
So welcome everybody to the Tennessee Native Plant Society seminar tonight. As we do the seminar, what we should do is everybody be on mute so we don't hear any background noises. I'm Alan Trentley. I'm the Vice President of Tennessee Native Plant Society. I'm going to be hosting tonight. And tonight's speaker is Jaimie Matzko. And I'll do a quick introduction here. Jaimie Matzko is currently Biodiversity Program Specialist at Discover Life in America. She's been a naturalist and educator in the Smoky Mountains for over 20 years. She is a University of Tennessee graduate with a degree in environmental studies with a focus on ecology and evolutionary biology. Did you have Dr. Ettenheimer as one of your professors?
Oh, I don't think so.
He's the fish
But
guy.
it's been a few years.
Okay, yeah. Let me continue. Her hobbies include gardening, nature photography, bird watching, and hiking. She has been working to replace ornamental and invasive plants with native species on her property in Cosby, Tennessee, and loves creating habitat for beneficial insects, birds, and other wildlife. Jaimie currently works for Discover Life in America and is passionate about sharing their mission to connect communities and scientists in discovering and understanding and conserving the natural world. So thank you for doing our presentation for tonight.
Thank you for inviting me. That, is a great introduction. And yeah, I'm excited to talk to you guys about this topic because, as an organization, Discover Life in America studies biodiversity in Great Smoky Mountains National Park. And it's one of the things that is really crucial to the health of an ecosystem. And I'm sure as a group, any members of the Tennessee Native Plant Society, one of the reasons we plant natives is because we know it is really good for the ecosystem in our yards. Just a little bit more about Discover Life in America as an organization. Alan, thank you for sharing that the mission, which is connecting communities and scientists in discovering, understanding, and conserving the natural world, which is really important because we are studying all of the life in Great Smoky Mountains National Park through our flagship project, the All-Taxa Biodiversity Inventory, which is just basically a long way of saying that we are documenting every species in the park. We've been doing it for 25 years, and we have doubled the number of species known in the park, and we have added 1,079 species. That was just our most recent update. New to science, so species that have never been recorded anywhere else on Earth, which is pretty amazing. We estimate that there could be 60 to 80,000 species in Great Smoky Mountains National Park. So we still have our work cut out for us. Even though we've doubled that number, we still are about 21,669. So finding new species all the time. And, it is the parks project and was started the same way that we are wanting to increase biodiversity and protect biodiversity in our yard. That is one of the reasons that we are really passionate about talking to folks about, what we've learned through studying the Smokies, some of the things that are really important to protecting and attracting biodiversity. And one really interesting thing that I would love to share with y'all is when you look at the breakdown of diversity of what we found as we've been studying all of the species in Great Smoky Mountains National Park, is that the amount of insects that we have found, the number of species, is about 47% of all of the life. And if you look at, what are the things people are usually thinking of the park? They think of, Smokey the Bear. They think of even salamanders, because we do have an incredible diversity of salamanders. But and even the birds, we have over 200 species of birds that could be found in the Smokies. But all of those vertebrates make up a very small percentage of life in the park. Insects are still understudied. And that's, even though that's been our big focus for a while now, the more we look, the more we find, and we're starting to do some DNA barcoding, which has been really successful in finding and documenting new species more quickly. So a lot of great things going on the technology front, but I just always like to share this image because it gives you a great kind of breakdown of when you look at life. Plants are a big chunk of, compared to vertebrates. And of course, we have an incredible diversity of plants, just like within the state of Tennessee. So it's and this holds true for most places on Earth. If you were to break down the biodiversity of most ecosystems, the insects and invertebrates are going to dominate that diversity of species. So there is a problem, though, that we all know as part of groups that study plants and love nature, that we are still seeing a decline, even though I'm old enough to remember before the Clean Water Act, before the Clean Air Act, even here in the Smokies in the early 2000s, the air quality was way worse than it currently is. So on a lot of fronts, we're actually doing better than we were 30 or 40 years ago. But on some fronts, we are losing quite a bit of biodiversity in birds and in insect populations. And not just biodiversity, but biomass. So we are in what a lot of scientists consider an extinction crisis of insects. And like I said, they're still understudied. So I think that although they've done some good research, we still don't know the full extent of it, as things maybe weren't quite as well studied to have comparison 50 or 60 years ago. So these are things that a lot of us see in the news. I just picked a few clips here of things that we see, and it can get a little bit depressing. But that's why I'm here to share information with you, because do not despair. This is the one thing that we can do something about. We do know what's driving the loss of biodiversity, and a lot of this stuff we have some control over, some of it we do not. We know that habitat loss and fragmentation is a huge problem with development. We also know that the use of pesticides, herbicides, not only affects our waterways, but can affect pollinators, and that also can contribute to loss. Fertilizers, nutrient loads, artificial lighting is a huge one that we don't hear enough about. We can control, again, what we do on our property, but cities, it's a growing problem with migrating birds, with insects, with a lot of things that we say, oh boy, I don't see fireflies very often anymore, or we're not seeing quite the number of birds. Artificial lighting does have a big impact. Invasive species, of course, as globalization is happening, we're seeing more and more plants, insects, even animals making their way to different areas, which also climate change, we see the storm intensities, we see drought, forest fire intensities getting beyond where it's normal and healthy in some cases. And that climate change also can fuel that invasive species as species are starting to move to different places where they wouldn't normally be able to exist with a changing climate. So we talk about these things and it can feel a little bit overwhelming. And that's, again, why I just want to remind everybody that, we can do something on the front of biodiversity in our little corner of the world, in our little neck of the woods. Even, I have a little 1/2 acre property. And, we've been able to bring a lot of new things to our yard with implementing just a few great species. And it really does matter what we plant. The biodiversity of native plants is an important factor because, I always refer to, milkweed and monarchs are kind of the gateway pollinator and native plants, because that's kind of what hooks people, because you're like, oh, the butterflies are just so gorgeous. And you see a tiger swallowtail, you see a monarch butterfly and they're beautiful. And you think, what can I do to attract more of these to my property? And then lo and behold, you are ending up getting hooked on all of the gorgeous plants and the other insects that you can attract. And then by attracting those other insects, you're also going to attract, more birds and have a whole, wealth of life in your yard. And the fact is, 83% of US land is privately owned. So, we're not going to solve the biodiversity and extinction crisis by just protecting places like Great Smoky Mountains National Park. This is going to be something that homeowners, by educating each other, by working together, we really can make a difference, because these parks are not islands that aren't affected by what private homeowners decide to do with their properties, unfortunately. And I'm within 1/2 mile of Great Smoky Mountains National Park, so I know by removing as many invasive species from my property, that's less than could make it into the park. And these things can spread quickly. So I think that these are all really leave me feeling empowered and hopeful. So I came up with a list of a few things that I think are, obviously, I know everybody's big proponents of planting native. So I wanted to kind of think outside the box on other tips that I could give on specific things and specific reasons to do them. We all know and read, especially we brought Doug Tallamy to Gatlinburg for Earth Day this year to do a talk. And a lot of these are things that Doug Tallamy says. He, of course, shares even more important, great tips. So if you haven't gotten on the Doug Tallamy bandwagon, please do. He's amazing. And we, I wanted to kind of share things that would help as reminders of why we're doing some of these things. And, obviously, reducing lawn and stopping spraying, leaving the leaves, thinking about host plants, all of these things are encouraged in a lot of different publications with native plants. So getting to some specifics as to, why some of these things and different tactics as to how we can minimize our impact, I think is really important. Any place that we have lawns, we're not going to see a huge diversity of life. Of course, grasses are a whole other thing. If we have native grasses, they can attract all kinds of wonderful things. But I kind of clump together lawn and spraying because the two usually go together, right? A lot of times, in order to keep that manicured lawn of those non-native grasses, they have to be sprayed and weeded, and people put a lot of time and energy into that. And it is harmful for the surrounding area, as a lot of insects might be harmed by the chemicals. It takes a lot of time and energy to maintain the properties, as well as it can contaminate the waterways through storm runoff. Specifically, I think that one tip, because some people do, if you have pets, you know, there are some good native grasses that don't grow as high. You also, in certain areas of your lawn, if you want to keep a section of lawn, you also can set the mower a little bit higher, like no lower than 3 inches, so that if you do have, you know, turtles or other types of, you know, I find salamanders and toads in my area, even snakes. And hopefully by setting that mower a little bit higher, you can protect some of those critters, and also mow over some of the little native weeds like violets that like to make their way into our lawns, and some of that, you know, it's not going to hurt anything to leave those flowers at all. So this is the big one right now, of course, because it's fall. And, you know a lot of you have probably heard, leave the leaves, you know, we don't want to mow over them. And why? What are specific instances of, you know, insects and animals that are going to use leaf litter? And, you know, a lot of people don't realize that firefly larvae can live up to 2 years in leaf litter. They're carnivorous. They still glow at night. We use the term, a lot of people use the term glow worms to talk about many different things that glow out in the forest. Sometimes they are referring to firefly larvae. But all stages of the fireflies have bioluminescence. And the firefly larvae will continue to live in the leaf litter, but they're very, you know, susceptible to being raked or mowed over, or even just when people, you know, gather them up and bag them up to send them off for composting or to the landfill. It's obviously, we're not going to see fireflies the following year. A lot of butterflies and moths will will have their pupa and cocoons in leaf litter. Bumblebees, specifically queens, a lot of bumblebees don't make it through the winter, and the queen will just kind of stay hunkered down and find herself a place in the leaf litter and a safe crevice. So, you know, a lot of these things that we do want to see in the spring, you know, they're going to be hanging out and staying warm. The leaf litter provides, you know, not just the nutrients and but warmth and insulation throughout the winter. So, you know, even salamanders, some frogs, wood frogs in particular, can survive the winter temps, kind of hibernating in the top layer of soil and almost freeze completely solid. It's kind of a science, you know, phenomenon that their blood has higher glucose levels, so that their blood doesn't actually freeze. So they can also be hard to tell when they're, you know, in kind of a wooded or forested area below the leaf litter in that top layer. So just wanted to give some good examples to encourage everybody that, you know, if you do live in a neighborhood, you know, we have to remember that it is the real world. We have to follow sometimes homeowner association rules, or sometimes we just might not want our lawn to look super messy around the gardens. So one good tactic is, as the leaves are falling, just to gently rake them up against the base of a tree, leaving a little bit of room around the ring of the tree so that you don't get too much moisture built up around the trunk. Or you can also just gently kind of rake and move your leaves into your garden and insulate all of those perennials. Another important part of this is also not to just leave the leaves, but all of those kind of meadow species that we have, the coneflowers, the goldenrods in particular, this is really important. Joe Pye weed, a lot of these perennials have hollow or near hollow stems, and they make great places for insects to lay their eggs. So I usually will just let the plants just stand throughout the whole winter and wait until temperatures are consistently above 50 degrees before I really move anything or cut anything back. If you really need to trim back some of the vegetation, if you leave at least like maybe 3 or 4 feet of those stems, that will probably be where most of the activity is happening. So there are ways to modify it and make sure that you're still providing that habitat that's needed for those insects. So lots of things. And you know what? The best thing about this is it's less work for all of us. I am somebody that I'm like, oh, I don't have to rake leaves. Great, perfect. I would much rather be spending my time deciding where I'm going to plant more trees and shrubs in the fall, because it's a great time to do that. So picking host plants, I should say, is a really important part of planning your garden and, landscaping. There are two things you want to accomplish. You've got general host plants that are going to be important because they provide food and shelter for a large number of species. Then you have some that it's like, wow, there are certain species that they're very specific to a host plant. So making sure you include those in your landscaping can help make sure that those particular, and this is all a bunch of examples of butterflies that I found of common trees that you might include in your landscaping if you want to provide habitat for these species that are a little more particular. Like I just planted 3 pawpaws this fall because I was like, everybody's like, oh, you want to harvest the pawpaws, and I said no, I want to provide habitat for zebra swallowtails. Obviously sassafras and Dutchman's pipe are important for the pipevine and spicebush swallowtails. There are a lot of butterflies that can use species like spicebush, which is another important one for the spicebush swallowtails, obviously. Viburnums are great for the spring azures and the hummingbird clearwing moths, which are one of my favorites to see. As well as passion flower is, once you get it started, it's very easy to keep it going, but it is a tough perennial. I've ended up just buying established plants to plant because starting from seeds was fairly difficult, even with cold stratification. But I'm hoping it will pay off and we'll see some of the variegated fritillaries. But these are all ones that are fairly common. I think blueberry bushes are one of those shrubs that a lot of people think goes in like, you either have a blueberry farm or you're growing a bunch of blueberries, but blueberries so good to add to your landscaping because they're gorgeous. They turn beautiful fall colors. They're beautiful when they're flowering. They provide a great resource of nectar and food for butterflies, and also host. They're good host plants. But also think about all the blueberries that you're going to have for the birds to eat. A lot of people also, when I planted, I rescued some elderberry plants, and people were like, "Oh, you're going to have so many elderberries." And I said, "You mean the birds are going to have so many elderberries?" Because nobody's got time to pick all those elderberries that you need to make elderberry syrup or elderberry jelly. So I let the birds take care of them. And the plants that you want to include and trees are that in order to provide resources for a large amount of wildlife and caterpillars. The first example I will give are oaks. Oaks are a keystone species. So they provide, not only hosting over 400 species of caterpillars, which is more than any other genus of trees. Just to compare, our state tree of Tennessee, which I love, tulip poplars, or sometimes I call them tulip trees since they are one of the magnolias. They only host 28 species of moths. So, not to say don't plant tulip poplars, because we just said that there are some butterflies that count on them, but oaks are ones that you definitely want to include in landscaping, because caterpillars are going to be your keystone, of a healthy ecosystem for your native plant landscaping. A lot of things eat caterpillars and count on caterpillars for survival. 96% of songbirds feed their young insects, and a large majority of that are caterpillars. So it's an important thing to include. Plums and cherries, and I just added genuses and not a whole lot of specific information, because I know people are coming from all over the state where there are a lot of different varieties that you can include in, depending on the conditions that you have around the state. So, plums and cherries, the Prunus genus can host up to 320 different species of caterpillars. And willows host 243. Another important thing that we're going to talk about in a minute that willows are also really good for is they are early bloomers. And I think they often get overlooked in native landscaping, even including myself. I have not really incorporated them, and I intend to change that. I did just plant some mountain mints. This is my tactic to try to compete with the non-native spearmint and chocolate mint that somebody planted in my front garden that I have not been able to eradicate in 8 years. So I've planted black-eyed Susans, bee balm. I've let Joe Pyeweed and goldenrods, and mountain mints are, I guess, ferocious spreaders. So you do have to be careful with them, but they provide an abundant amount of resources for all sorts of insects. So they are a great one to incorporate. If you're worried about it spreading, just keep it in pots. And of course, asters. There's so many different varieties, and they just provide so much food, shelter, resources for a lot of different species. And goldenrods, which are not only great for hosts for caterpillars, but a lot of other insects use them for food. Particularly because they are late bloomers, they're really important to help a lot of the insects make it through getting their last bit of resources if they're going to try to hunker down for winter. But also we talked about great places for insects to lay eggs. A lot of wasps and other beneficial insects will use them. And ironweeds, which are just one of my favorites because they're so gorgeous and can host quite a few varieties of different beneficial insects. So one of the other important factors, once you've kind of established what you're trying to attract to your yard in terms of host plants, you also want to think about the seasonal food varieties for wildlife that you're wanting to attract to your yard. So obviously, the more variety of plants that you have, the more variety of foods. But, you really want to think about with trees, shrubs, what's going to produce berries, what's going to produce, acorns. You've got a lot of different types of nuts that trees can produce that are important to wildlife, beech, hickory, walnuts, even the other food sources that are really just important for insects and birds and other, some of us may not love the idea of squirrels being in our yard, especially if we're trying to feed birds, but squirrels are still an important part, and deer, a lot of different wildlife count on a lot of those tree nuts. And you also want to think about, if you're wanting to help the pollinators, you want to have some early bloomers, as well as ones that are going to be late in the fall. So those ironweeds, those asters, those goldenrods are really good for late bloomers. I included a list of things that bloom early and late. I just love the witch hazel flowers. They're one of my favorites. And I'm almost like, are they early? Are they late? Because sometimes I'll see them in February, sometimes I'll see them in November. So they're a winter variety, and the reason that they bloom at such an odd time is because they basically have evolved with the particular moths that are able to survive the cold temperatures by hiding in the leaf litter, kind of almost in like what they call torpor, or like hibernation state in the leaf litter, and then come out to, when it's warm enough, to feast on the flowers of the witch hazel. And that helps them to not have to compete with other insects for food. Other early ones that I think are not only important for the nectar sources, buckeye varieties, yellow buckeye, we also have red buckeye. They are really important for hummingbird species during migration. The flowers are gorgeous. I think a lot of people, especially I'm from Central Ohio, so a lot of people, when they think of the buckeye trees, they think of the nut, but the flowers are really important to a lot of wildlife. Serviceberry, or since in the Smokies, they say sarvisberry, is another early bloomer that is gorgeous and pretty easy to incorporate into the landscape. And of course, everybody loves redbuds, dogwoods. We've had a particular problem the last 2 years. We've got a very large redbud tree in our front yard, and unfortunately the late frost has gotten our blooms, so it hasn't been at full bloom for all of the bumblebees and butterflies and pollinators. So I'm hoping next year that won't happen. But that is one of the issues with the early bloomers, is depending on where you are, those the blooms can get hit by a late frost. A lot of the oak trees, people don't think about the flowers that they produce, but they do produce some great, they're a great pollen and nectar source for pollinators. And of course, the spring ephemerals. I mean, I could have listed a whole bunch of these that love to be out in the sun in the early spring before it starts getting too hot. And there's such a huge variety of them. So they're really great to incorporate. And, you know, with the late, we've talked a little bit about all of these late blooming ones. And I just want to throw it out there that I always also say, uh, I've been doing poison ivy removal on some of my areas on my property, but leaving some poison ivy is not a bad thing because the berries will persist over winter and are a really important food source for birds. So if you are wanting to provide some good sustenance to your local songbird population, leave some poison ivy, let it get nice and healthy, and everywhere else, you know, make sure you keep it back. And if you figure out how to do that, let me know, because I'm still fighting it off. But it's not a terrible thing. It's a native plant. It's supposed to be here. You know, we just want to keep it sometimes in certain areas of our yard where we're not going to be constantly having to deal with it. So another important thing about wanting to provide good habitat and biodiversity in your landscape is providing some sort of water source. Obviously, the best source isn't always within your control, but you know, fountains or moving water features, something with a pump that's going to keep that water from getting stagnant, from getting you know, any bacteria built up is going to be important. But you can also do a bird bath, even a saucer, and putting some like clean pebbles for butterflies, moths, bees, you know, all of our native bees and bumblebees. A lot of the food sources that you're putting out in the way of, you know, nectar sources, that's also going to provide some water for the wildlife. But even I say year round, because even through the winter, having water to bathe and clean their feathers can help birds a lot with even insulation. It sounds like it doesn't make any sense, but they need to keep those feathers clean in order to keep the down, insulating them properly so it can actually help survival through a rough patch of winter or even late fall, early spring. And, you know, managing for a variety of habitats, you know, going back to, you know, just kind of leaving the garden alone through the winter is going to allow a lot of those living things that have decided to take shelter and use it for habitat, keeping them intact. Standing trees, if you have them away from your house and it's safe, leave them there. And I put this little graphic because I thought it just did such a great job illustrating all of the different things that can use dead trees, from fungi to plants to birds, woodpeckers, bats, you know, owls, and some mammals, even including squirrels. You know, rabbits can dig underneath and find shelter. So many different things can live in dead trees. But you know, you do want to make sure that it's something that is going to be safe around your house. One of the things that we talked about with climate change was, you know, how many wind events we're getting, and I'm sure like a lot of y'all, there's sticks and debris all over the garden and yard, and I love to just grab that stuff and just start. We've just made a huge piles around the edge of the woods, and we just keep adding to them. And, you know, the birds can use that for shelter, or even some of our local small mammals can use that for shelter. Another thing I would like to do is just set a log or rock in the middle of the garden, or in a patch of, you know, woods. If you don't have natural logs and rocks, they make really good habitat for salamanders. For one day, I was trying to move a few things around in the garden, and I lifted up a rock, and I had noticed there was a 5-lined skink guarding her eggs. And I would just gently put the rock back, like, "Ooh, I'm sorry." But that was just kind of a cool experience, that having those rocks and areas where they can like make shelter underneath is an important part of a healthy ecosystem, and providing those safe places for them to go. And you know, a lot of folks do recommend adding artificial houses for birds, bees, and bats. This also, I'm sure, you know, with feeding birds, there can be some tricky things that go along with that. Excuse me. In terms of, you do have to make sure that if you're going to do that, that they stay clean, that they're put in appropriate areas. Anytime we're providing this artificial means, we want to make sure that we're not going to create a situation that becomes more harmful than helpful. So they do require maintenance, and they do require a lot of times maybe protecting from predators. Bats are the one that you really do want to be careful about. I've got a friend who works for U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and she's done a lot of bat research. And, you know, there are certifications and things that you want to look for when getting bat houses that will make sure that they stay safe and are not going to spread things like the white nose syndrome in bats. Most of them that use the artificial houses are not cave dwelling, so it's not a huge issue, but there are also just other things you want to look for the bats coming in and out of the bat box. So definitely make sure that if you purchase one, from a reputable source, and some with bird houses too. You know, for different bird species, there has to be a certain size opening, and there are different recommendations on how to protect it from predators. That would be not, you know, and some people might say, well, that's just part of nature, and I can't, you know, disagree with that. So just it's a good idea to look into the source of where you're getting it. And a great thing to participate in, if you do decide you want to get bird houses, Audubon Society does have a nest watch that you can join in. It's basically community science monitoring of your nest boxes, and they have a lot of good plans for different houses for different species, depending on where you live and what you want to attract. So I've looked this up specifically for this, and I was kind of amazed at what I found in the state of Tennessee, that we have documented 1,682 moth species, 140 species of butterflies, 350 species of bees, and 423 species of birds. That is a lot of diversity of these things that we've been talking about. Of course, I've got a lot of different photos to kind of scroll through, because there are so much more beyond this in terms of, you know, this is just native bees. This doesn't include wasps, which a lot of people think of wasps as the things that are always trying to sting us, but there are just little itty bitty tiny moths that are, or tiny wasps that are native, that would never be able to sting us. They're incredibly diverse, and some of them incredibly adorable, and you know, just really an important part of the ecosystem. Then we also have bugs, and I'm going to go through the true bugs. So this is, I guess, my intro to what does biodiversity look like in your yard? What should we be seeing? You know, we can provide all of these great things how do we know that we're going in the right direction, especially if we're not like an entomologist? You know, going out and obviously seeing what is in your yard is the best way to find it. And I do work with an entomologist, and he is also a big proponent of planting native. And he has shared a bunch of photos with all of things that he has found in his tiny little meadow yard in a suburb in Knoxville. So, you know, he's planted quite a few native species, and also does a lot of talks on pollinator habitat and planting natives. But these are just a few of the things that he has taken photos of on his property. All of the various species of wasps that are visiting, not just, you know, flowers, but plants, and finding habitat. And then the butterflies and moths, of course, adults, as well as we've got the caterpillars, which I always think are a little bit harder to find, but also kind of fun to see. It's like a scavenger hunt to see if you can find in the leaves and around the garden. And flies. And the interesting thing I think about a lot of these photos is the flies look like bees. A lot of those are considered hoverflies, or flower flies is another name for them. And they on purpose want you to think that they are a bee or a wasp, because that's the way they keep any other insects or animals from messing with them. But they are perfectly safe. They just look like they are dangerous. And beetles, of course, lots of different types of beetles, including fireflies, because they are not flies and they are not bugs. They are actually a type of beetle, along with many, many others. And hopefully you all see more of these varieties and less of the Japanese beetle variety in your gardens. And true bugs. We use bug as a very, you know, generic term, but true bugs, the order Hemiptera, is a very specific group that the wings are crossed and not right next to each other like they are in the beetles, and also very important to the ecosystem. So they're one of the things that you want to keep your eye out for and learn more about. And of course, there's lots of other insects and arthropods, including dragonflies, damselflies, spiders. Spiders are a great one to have around, because they are going to take care of some of those non-beneficial insects around the garden. And birds, you know, even in a suburban neighborhood, you can see such a huge variety of birds, particularly if you're attracting all of those insects. A lot of, like I said, birds are depending on those insects for survival, especially when they're feeding their young. So one of the things I wanted to share with y'all is, if you're like, well, wow, I would love to document and find all of these things in my yard, but how will I know what I'm looking at? The iNaturalist app is a great way. It's free. It is a community science database, and you're also going to connect to a bunch of experts and naturalists that can help you identify things. So if you download the iNaturalist app and start an account, you can take photos of the things you're seeing, and it also will suggest identifications. And the next slide, I'll share a little bit more with some of those specifics, but that is just a great way to learn more about what you're seeing in terms of plants and wildlife. Homegrownnationalpark.org is Doug Tallamy's website, where you can find resources about planting native and, some of the benefits. He also is a wildlife ecologist and entomologist. So he's got a lot of great statistical data about the importance of providing habitat for all of these great things. So picture this is just like a plant ID app, and can also be really helpful, but not necessarily a great replacement for iNaturalist. It's kind of the one that you might use to ID if you're not finding what you're looking for on iNaturalist. But the reason that I always recommend iNaturalist is because all of the observations you make can be shared with a wider community and used in research. So you are, it's like a social media account, but for nature nerds is what I always say. It's like a way that you can share what you're seeing in nature. Other people can help you identify it. And a lot of those other apps are not going to upload that data to a place where others might be able to use it to do research, whether they're doing something on a plant survey of the area, or maybe somebody's looking up moths in Tennessee and how many people are seeing. We use it in Great Smoky Mountains National Park as a project to get more park visitors learning about nature. So we have an initiative called Smokies Most Wanted, and we have a project on iNaturalist that anytime anybody's in the park, if they upload an observation to iNaturalist, it goes into our project, and we can learn more about what the visitors in the Smokies are seeing, which can give us a lot of really valuable data about phenology, about how rare or common things are being seen. It can also tell us more about distribution. And of course, like I mentioned, we are a very small staff, and the park gets about 12 to a couple of years ago, they had 14 million visitors. So we figure, why not try to turn a few of those into community scientists? And hopefully they'll learn a little bit more about flora and fauna in the Smokies and appreciation for the biodiversity in the area. So we love iNaturalist. The last slide is just a bunch of different resources of books, of websites that I can share this PowerPoint as a PDF with the group so that anybody can access some of the links that are in here, and all of that great information. And I think I may have just gone a few minutes over, but I'd love to see, I'm going to check out some of the questions folks have. Serviceberry. So Terry, let me start at the beginning. Terry says, we have just 3 blueberry bushes and freeze several quarts each year in addition to the birds. Oh, awesome. Yes. Enjoying them and the pollinator benefits. Yes, it's okay to eat some of your blueberries. I'm sure that they are delicious, and I'm sure the birds are getting plenty. But she also says that she has a serviceberry and has never bloomed. It's about 5 feet tall and purchased and 10 years old, and purchased at Reflection Writing. Any suggestions? I would probably ask if it's getting enough sunlight. I do tend to see them on like the sides of mountains and in a lot of like variety of habitats. But I would say somebody else also might have some more experience growing serviceberry. But it seems like as long as it's getting enough sunlight and, oh, got a new message. Thank you. I'm glad y'all have enjoyed the topic. And yeah, if anybody wants to unmute and ask questions or contribute, that would be great too. I think it's still a pretty small group this evening.
My serviceberry is light along the edge of a woodland.
Okay.
It probably is facing northeast. The woods behind it are more towards the southwest.
Okay. Have you seen like how many hours of sunlight it might be getting? Or have you tracked at all?
No, I mean, it gets morning sun, but
That's
it
good.
doesn't get that afternoon sun because it's got a little patch of woods behind it.
Yeah. And it might be, you might try even just giving it like some natural nutrients, mulching, adding some leaf litter around the base, just to see.
I think someone just put
Oh,
in the chat
yes.
about having two, although it's not one that needs male and female from what I've read.
Yeah. Yeah, I didn't think so, because I know that's why I planted 3 pawpaws, and I'm gonna have to keep an eye on those as they get bigger, because you can't tell which ones are male or female. So I might just have to get a couple more, because they are not self-pollinators. And so in order to get any blooms, you have to be sure to have at least a male and female. But
I have that problem with spice bush. I have 3 males.
oh no, and that is just one of
So I
my
don't get
favorites
berries.
too. Yeah, you have to just plant more. It's a good excuse to have to plant more stuff.
Hey, Jaimie, I had a quick question. This is Quentin
Yeah.
Humbard. My wife's actually the member, but we were listening in tonight. I noticed one of the natives that we have been happy with has been the American holly, but you didn't mention much about it. Tell us about that and why we should or should not could think about the holly.
We've noticed that there are like a gazillion different flies and bees. I mean, the whole tree was like reverberating with insects this last spring. So
That's probably just an oversight on my part of just trying to think of some of the different things. And also when we have like over 100 native trees, so it's hard to look, but especially if it is like the, American holly, our Eastern variety. No, they are wonderful. They are another one though, that you do have to have more than one and to make sure you have a male and female, because they're not self-pollinating. But I think they're a wonderful option to have. And they do attract a lot of different insects, and then also do provide the berries are good for a lot of birds and stuff. I want to say that you might even see like cedar waxwings. They might be one that love the holly berries.
They do.
And our hummingbirds use them quite a lot as well.
Or they house in there like to hide, or they make a little nest in it.
Oh, that's cool. Yeah.
It seems to be the only tree that the birds can, hide from cats. Cats don't like holly trees.
Yes. And it's a shame that we have to worry about that, but it is a reality, unfortunately.
Anyway, thanks for that. It was a wonderful presentation. Thank you.
I enjoyed it.
Thank you. I hope that y'all enjoyed it. I tried to think of some just great like facts that y'all might not have heard, because I know that you probably talk a lot about plants and planting native, but just wanted to give some different inspiration.
I have a question about cultivars and hybrids. I've been trying to restore the woods behind my house, and I try to go for the straight species or pure species, because, and not being a scientist, I understand that cultivars and hybrids don't actually reproduce in the wild. What do you think about that? Unfortunately, at most places where you try to buy plants, even the native plants, it turns out that they're all cultivars, especially like phlox. And what's your opinion on that?
It is a hard one, because I know in my area around the Cosby, we're in Cott County and Sevier County, we don't have a lot of nurseries that are selling native varieties. I will usually have to go out towards Knoxville or Asheville. I think we are going to make the journey out to Overhill Gardens at the end of this month, which I'm super excited about, which is kind of south of Knoxville and has an incredible selection. But yes, it's frustrating. I was joking the other day that I'm like, somebody should tell the executives at Home Depot that Lowe's is about to start a huge native plant, promotion, and that they better get on the ball, and then they should go to Lowe's and tell them, so get them pinned against each other so they'll both like make this big effort to sell native plants, because it is an issue in terms of when you start. It's not an easy thing to answer, and it's not necessarily my specialty, but from what I understand in terms of anytime you are, yes, we're going to the open house on that Friday. So you will see the Discover Life in America staff there. You start also kind of messing with the important parts of that plant that animals are using for, food and resources. So, I mean, it's obviously, we're also not going to, like, we don't even know the level that some plants have been hybridizing even in the wild, like trilliums and violets. So yeah, it's a really kind of complicated question, because in some cases it might not affect like the ability of the plant to produce for wildlife. And in some cases it could have an effect, but it would be hard to know which ones would be, most greatly affected in terms of, oh yeah, that's interesting. There's some information in the chat on the American holly. The Ilex opaca is great for most of Tennessee, but is not native to the Nashville basin. So yeah, that's kind of why I really stuck to very generic genuses, because I know everybody's in different areas of certainly what they would recommend for me here in Cott County, right next to the national park and right below these 6,000-foot peaks, is going to be very different than what folks even recommend, 20 or 30 miles down the road. In some cases, let alone, Tennessee is such a large state. So I would say, depending on where are you located, Tim?
Oh, me? I'm in Middle Tennessee in Nashville.
Okay.
Right. But strangely, when I heard the word biodiversity in the title of tonight's presentation, I'm currently out in Arizona in Tucson house sitting, and I had to calibrate the time to make sure I didn't miss this presentation.
Oh yeah.
And
well, we're glad you were able to join us.
Yeah, it's terrific.
Yes. Well, I would say that, with the cultivars, I would try to find a trusted like nursery in your area that with each individual like hybrid, as much as they know about it, that they can share, will help you to make that decision. Because like I said, it can be difficult to find ones that are very specific to your area of what varieties that you have. So I'm sorry I don't have a better answer for that.
No,
but I wouldn't say it's necessarily always going to be bad or always not going to be bad. It's just going to, I think, really have to depend on, because trees versus flowers versus, they're still working on the American chestnut,
right,
on trying to come up with a hybrid that's suitable. But of course, that's, a hybrid all the way from China and trying to make sure the fungus, which is a very difficult thing to try to bring that immunity, but the genetics can be a really tricky thing to keep things able to adapt to that local environment.
There's another question on chat.
Oh.
From Jane. It says, do you find much activity in the leaf litter in deep winter?
You could, honestly, it's it's like the depending on where you are. If you're somewhere where you're going to get snow, especially that snow is going to provide kind of insulation from the cold, where that leaf litter underneath there might stay protected from kind of the outside elements. A lot of Tennessee isn't going to see that much snow throughout winter. So we're going to continue to have a lot of insect activity. So I would say we have to be real careful in deep winter if we are moving about in some of those places where there's leaf litter, because a lot of things are possibly coming out a little bit during the day and then kind of tucking away at night, where other varieties are just going to kind of bed down and stay in place for most of the season, just depending on if you're talking about, the bumblebee queen versus, some of the insect larvae versus some of the moths, and even like morning cloak butterflies, in some cases will, bed down in the leaf litter, in some places and survive through the winter. So there's a lot of different, with the amount of diversity that we have, depending on the day and the weather. I mean, even though bears hibernate, we see bears out in the middle of winter, usually the males, not the females. The females are usually either with their cubs up in their den, in the trees, or have just given birth to cubs in the tree. But males, they oftentimes will just decide if it's a nice day, or we've seen bear tracks out in the snow, where they've just come out and just kind of wandered around a little bit and then hunker back down. So a lot of animals just are supposed to do certain behaviors, but they don't necessarily always follow what we think they should be doing or what we've heard they should be doing. So yeah, I think that there's going to be a lot of things going on, activity in the ground and in that leaf litter.
Are there any other questions?
Thank you. Great information.
Yes, thank you all.
Thank you. I appreciate the invite, and I really enjoyed chatting with y'all. Oh, we had one more message.
Yep. It's a thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all for joining tonight, and thank you very much, Jaimie, for the presentation. That was
yes, and I will send along the PDF, so y'all can share that with anybody who would like to access some of the resources. And you see, you guys are down here too as the resource for information.
All right. Well, good night, everyone. I gotta go feed my cats. They're trying to break through the door.
Yeah.
I better go get them.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Thank you all again
Thank
for
you.
joining.
Thank you. Appreciate y'all.